Today I'm going to show you how to change the brake pads in a Honda. This is a Honda Accord, a 92. You can see, if this is your first time, probably give you a little tour of what the brake system is like and what you're looking at here underneath the corner of the car here. To start with, this is the rotor right here. These are the wheel studs. This is the axle that sticks out of the hub. Now the brakes are part of the rotor, and then here's the caliper right here. This portion is actually the caliper bracket. This portion right here is the actual caliper itself. Now if we look behind it a bit, let's see. This is the bleeder valve. This is a rubber cap that gets pulled off to expose the top of the bleeder valve right here. Put that back on. This is the brake line that goes into the chassis of the car. Just for familiarization, here's the strut, here's the upper A-arm for this car, and this is part of the knuckle assembly. This is the tie rod. This is the sway bar right here, connects with the end link. Here's your lower control arm, and then right back here, this is the axle. So here's the inner CV boot. Here's the outer CV boot right there. So what you're going to need to know is how to take this caliper off. There's a bolt right here. There's another one right here. Now that's to get the caliper, this section, off. If you want to take the bracket, the whole thing off, there's a bolt right here, and there's another corresponding bolt on the bottom side. We're only going to need to take this bolt off right here, so I'm going to do that right now. Now on the Honda, we need a 17mm wrench, or I use a wrench, to get this bolt off. So you want to make sure that you're doing it the right direction if you don't want to tighten it. So if we're going to, this way would be to tighten it, this way would be to loosen it. You can imagine yourself facing that way, lefty. You want to go counterclockwise. So, and then what I use is just kind of break it loose real quick. Now the other one, the ratcheting wrenches, are super helpful. The bottom one seems to always be tougher. I'm going to undo the bottom one first. Makes it easier, because then it kind of hangs by this one. Now, it's going to be long and going to be greased. So I'm going to wipe this grease off. We're going to replace that grease as well. So there's the first one. The second one. Now what happens is these the caliper actually slides forwards and backwards on these bolts, and that's why they're set up the way they are. So now we can pull this out. Of course it's a little jammed, so I'm going to pry just a little bit. This thing's ancient. Alright. Parts that fell off are these help protect against reduced noise. So here's the caliper. Just a quick note, this is the caliper piston here. This is what extends outwards when you're braking and applies the pressure on the pads. So the pads are still right here. I'm going to put the caliper here. We don't want it to hang by the brake line. So I'm going to set it right there for now. Pop these. this is brake pad number 1. There's going to be a pair of them. Brake pad number 2. It's on the back side. And that was down to bare metal. Alright. The rotor probably should also be replaced, but for now, I'm just going to stick with the pads, and I'll do the rotors later. So the new pads, these are ceramics from the auto parts store. Now, the back one has this. You kind of want to pay attention to that when you're pulling pads apart. So, let's stick this back in. And just so you can see, so there's grooves here and here that these must fit into. Alright, pads are back on. Now the caliper's not going to fit back on with this piston here, so I'm going to squeeze it back in. Usually most people use C-clamps. Actually, C-clamps are much better than this. I'm just going to find mine at the time, so what I'm going to do, slowly press this piston back in. The fluid is going to go back to the brake master cylinder, so you don't want to overflow that. So you want to have a little bit of room in the brake master cylinder. I'll show you where that is shortly here. Alright. Piston is pushed back in. This is a rubber dust protector to keep dirt from getting to the piston seal. I'm just going to push it. What happened, the air's gotten trapped behind it, so I'm going to kind of peel it back a little bit so that I can breathe, and then push it back down. So I pushed the rubber boot back in with a screwdriver, and now I'm going to put the bolts back in. Now on the back, at least in the 92s, it says G on the back. This one's the lower one. It's a solid metal pin. The upper one has a little rubber bushing at the end of it. So that's how you can separate the two. So what we'll do, you don't want to get the brake line twisted up. You want to put the caliper back on, like so. Get the little dust boots squished down and behind it. There we go. So like I said, the L1 goes on top, feed it in. G1 goes on the bottom. And there's actually a G right here and an L right here to help you keep track as well if you forget. It's on the caliper itself. Right here and right here. So now, making sure that the boots are pretty well straight. Tighten these suckers back up. Oops, that's the wrong way. They don't have to be super deadly tight, just tight enough, which is kind of weird because you would think for brakes you want them to be like uber extra tight, but that's not necessary. The force on the caliper is actually this way. So tight, but like I said, you don't want a couple taps with the hammer, for instance, is sufficient to, or mallet, sufficient to get them nice and snugged up. Alright, so that's most of it there, replacing the pads. Now what we need to do is bleed the brakes. To do it yourself, you can make a bottle like this. You can see it's a Coke bottle. I have a breather tube here, and then the tube, I think this is 3/16 vacuum line here. Now what we'll do is we'll take some brake fluid. This is .3 brake fluid. Fill this up here. Now the purpose of this, you're not going to put this in the caliper. You want it deep enough where the hose is submerged. That way it won't suck air back up through the tube here. Now what bleeding the brakes is doing is we're going to remove air in the system, because air is going to lead to soft brakes, and we're going to try to remove some of the old brake fluid, which is going to be gross. So this is a 10mm wrench. Now you want to make sure, very sure, that you're going the right way the first time, and just slightly crack it, and then I just tighten it back up just to make sure that it's, you don't want to break that, and it's very easy to do, especially on older cars with rust areas. So I'm attaching this line, and what's going to happen is I'm going to pump the brake pedal. It's going to pump the hydraulic fluid into this bottle here and start going to fill up. And what that's going to do is going to remove air bubbles in the line, which cause soft brakes, and it's going to pump old brake fluid out. So we'll do that here now. Alright, so you'll see the brake fluid. I'm going to crack the brake line just a little bit now, or the brake bleeder valve, like I did earlier. Now I'm going to pump it with the brake pedal, and you'll see the fluids come out, and you'll see black fluid. Now that we're done here, I'm going to retighten this. Not too hard, you don't want to break it again. Like I said, you don't want to break it. It's really important. Alright, so where am I putting the fluid? So when I pump the brakes, this is the brake fluid reservoir. Fluid's going out of here, it's going through the brake lines to the brake caliper. So after pumping the brakes for a while, I stop for a little bit and I put more brake fluid in. It's hard to do one-handed. Now notice I keep putting I put the top on this. Brake fluid actually absorbs water out of the air, so you don't want to leave the container open. So now I top it off, and the brake fluid should be clear, not only at the master cylinder but also at your caliper, and that's why make sure I bled it quite a bit. Got a lot of the fluid out of there. Now I should top this. Now it's topped off. Now I did this a couple times while I was bleeding the brakes. I would pump, top off the brake fluid reservoir, and then pump some more. And the reason you don't want it to let it go dry is if you get down to the bottom, you start pumping air into the system, and that's exactly the opposite of what you want to do. And then you have to start all over again. So, all right, that is bleeding. That is replacing the brake calipers and bleeding the brakes for a '92 Honda.